This video explains why the US withdrawal from Afghanistan is sickening for most Americans. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. America's longest war, the nearly 20-year-long Afghanistan war, is coming to an end. But the way we are leaving Afghanistan is making most right thinking Americans sick to the stomach. Not because of our performance there or because we are withdrawing, but because we are getting a lousy reputation for abandoning those who help us in time of need by even putting their lives in jeopardy, with the horrifying prospect of them being slaughtered by the Taliban. What makes this message urgent is that we have set a deadline for getting out of Afghanistan, which is only 5 days away. That is August 31st. We may still have a day or 2 to 3 days to make an adjustment to the deadline and force the Taliban to accept it by threatening them with dire consequences if they don't, so that we can get most of our Afghan allies out of the country. The war in Afghanistan has been extremely costly, costing about $2 trillion in direct war and war related costs, including those in the Iraq War. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have been debt financed to the tune of $2 trillion, which will incur interest costs of $6.5 trillion by 2050, according to the Associated Press. The United States has committed to paying more than $2 trillion in health care, disability, burial, and other costs for roughly 4 million Afghanistan and Iraq veterans, which will hit their peak after 2048. The human toll, while not like the World Wars or the Korean and Vietnam Wars, has nevertheless been significant. American service members and contractors killed in Afghanistan through April 2021 has been 2,448 and 3,846 contractors, respectively. In addition, 1,144 NATO service members have been killed. According to the United States Department of Defense Casualty Status Report, more than 20,000 American soldiers were wounded in the conflict, many with permanent disabilities. Afghan national military and police killed total more than 66,000, with an additional 47,245 civilians dead. Taliban and other opposition fighters killed total 51,200. Number of aid workers killed stands at 444, and deaths of journalists total 72. After all these financial and human costs, as things stand, we are going to thoroughly botch the withdrawal. There are still 5 days left to complete the withdrawal by the deadline. President Biden has stated that he is not seeking an extension of the deadline from the Taliban beyond August 31st. The most likely result will be that the airlift of US citizens and Afghans will end by this weekend, leaving about 2 days for the military to pack up and leave. Secretary of State Tony Blinken stated that there are about 1,500 Americans left in Afghanistan, 500 of whom have been instructed on how to leave within 24 hours. Some of the remaining 1,000 may already have left, whereas the others may not want to leave. But with the difficulties in trying to make it to the Kabul airport, it is very likely that some American citizens may not be able to get out by the deadline. According to Fox News, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby stated that every American in Afghanistan should be able to get out by the deadline on August 31st. But he was less clear about what will happen to the unknown number of Afghans who aided America over the last 20 years and have been trying to flee the country in recent weeks. The Afghans who helped America, according to a New York Times headline of today, number as high as 250,000, and most will not be able to get out by the deadline. that is the most sickening part of the botched withdrawal. Most of these Afghan men and women helped America and our NATO allies prosecute the war against the Taliban and Al Qaeda. It could not have been fought. The war could not have been fought successfully without their invaluable assistance. Some will definitely be murdered by the Taliban, perhaps along with their families, and most of the remaining will likely be marginalized by them, facing a bleak future. Abandoning such invaluable helpers is unconscionable. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has stated that the US will not leave anyone behind. Presumably, he means that by the deadline, all American citizens who want to get out will be able to get out, though with the Taliban blocking their entry into the Kabul airport at its checkpoints, some definitely will not be able to make it by the deadline. Now, after the deadline, he said US government will work with the Taliban regime to evacuate the more than 200,000 Afghans and their families. Most people realistically assessing the situation know that it is highly unlikely that goal will ever be achieved. Taliban has already declared its intention to keep all Afghans in the country and not allow them to leave. Why this message is urgent is that President Biden and his team still have a 2 to 3 day window to change course and extend their deadline. The Afghan regime will be an economic basket case. Possibility of some economic aid can be used as leverage to force the Taliban to extend the deadline, and the regime can be threatened with dire consequences if it does not allow the US to evacuate Afghans that have proper visas. But Secretary Blinken has indicated that request for extension of the deadline is unlikely because of the highly credible threat of attacks on the airport by ISIS and Al Qaeda. One explanation for this developing debacle is that the US is lacking the will to use its power. However, there is another explanation. As I pointed out in part 1 and part 2 of this series of videos, I strongly suspect that the decision of the US and coalition forces to leave Afghanistan is a conspiracy between the Germans, Chinese, German masqueraders in America and Britain, the Taliban, Afghan top political leaders like Ashraf Ghani, Hamid Karzai, and Abdullah, Iran, and the Pashtuns in Pakistan to allow the Taliban to gain power without a fight. Most of the Afghan population is in agreement with this outcome. I repeat that. Most of the Afghan population is in agreement with this outcome, except perhaps most women and some of those Afghan men who helped the United States during the war. A natural result of this conspiracy is that the conspirators would like to punish the collaborators with America and Britain by killing as many as possible. German masqueraders did that in America as much as possible after World War II. Some World War II veterans of non-German descent who were vulnerable were discriminated against and either impoverished or murdered. With threats, they were either forced not to marry or forced to sell their properties for pennies on the dollar and discriminated against in jobs to reduce them to penury as much as possible. I personally know of cases where this happened. The goal of the German masqueraders in America and Britain would be the same, for allowing Afghans who helped them who helped the United States and Britain to be either murdered or discriminated against in Afghanistan and impoverished. Therefore, it appears to have been a deliberate strategy of German masqueraders in highest positions in America to withdraw from Afghanistan under purposely created chaotic circumstances to punish the Afghans who helped them during the war, who helped America during the war. Further evidence of this strategy is that Bagram Air Base was a key part of the US military presence there. Besides the airport, leaving that airbase should have been the last act of the military. But the US started its evacuation by abandoning that base first, a clear indication of a diabolical strategy. The air base should have been evacuated only after all US citizens and all Afghans who had helped the US had been evacuated, because it had the capability of hitting the Taliban hard if they threatened US evacuation operations. What then are the likely consequences of this debacle, that is, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan? The US reputation as a dependable partner in war and international relations is going to suffer another severe blow. At the time of our withdrawal, US had only 2,500 troops left in Afghanistan, with several thousand contractors from various countries, including the United States, who were backed up by about 7,500 NATO forces. They were taking almost no casualties, but were providing crucial air support, intelligence, and maintenance to Afghan forces. This was hardly a forever war. We still have 30,000 troops in South Korea as insurance against North Korean or Chinese attack there. The Taliban would not have succeeded in taking Afghan cities, and certainly not Kabul, if US air support was available to Afghan government forces. But the conspiracy to hand over power to the Taliban had already been developed. All the Afghan top leaders, such as Ashraf Ghani, Hamid Karzai, and Abdullah, were in on it and wanted this outcome for further military adventures in the region. Thus, the Afghan regular army no longer had the goal of fighting the Taliban. In my opinion, there was no reason for the US to remain there. If we had remained there, our forces would have faced assaults from the regular Afghan army in addition to the Taliban. We have to find other ways to deal with the emerging threat now of Afghanistan again becoming a safe haven for all types of Islamic terrorists. But what will devastate the US reputation is the abandonment of more than 200,000 Afghans and their families who loyally worked with US forces. We are abandoning them to the mercy of Taliban killers. The unfortunate part is that we have done the same thing very recently in Iraq. President Trump showed his disdain for local Kurdish allies in December 2019 when he pulled US troops back from the Turkish-Syrian border overnight with no prior notice given to our Syrian Kurdish allies and US Special Forces. We thus abandoned the Syrian Kurds for tens of thousands of them to be killed or driven out of their strongholds by the Turkish military. Similarly, when the US pulled out from the Bagram air base, no notice was given to the commanders of the Afghan government forces. Thus, the US is developing a reputation as an unreliable ally that abandons those who provide help in time of need during war. The US has burnt its bridges in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan and may not be able to find allies in a future war in those regions. What a waste of $2 trillion spent, with huge $6.5 trillion interest costs on the debt so incurred as a result in the decades to come, and the $2 trillion future cost to support those wounded in the 20-year war, besides the thousands of soldiers and contractors dead. We certainly have people in high positions in America who are working to besmirch its reputation globally with the overall goal of destroying it from within. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos. You can also find the text of my videos on my Facebook channel.